If you want to know what the top pastors and ministry leaders are talking about when it comes to pastoring online and embracing digital and social media for their churches, well, I recently came across a interview and I definitely wanted to share it with you. If you're brand new to my channel, my name is Monty Weaver and I'm a digital strategist, and I work with entrepreneurs and small business owners and churches and nonprofits and really help them with their online presence and using technology and digital. And right now we're in that age of social media and live streaming exploding. Everyone is using it. And this is an opportunity for churches specifically to tap in and really embrace this, because the reality is live streaming is now here to stay. And I want to make sure that you have the tools to not only do it while we are all confined to our homes, but also to do this after we're back into normal society. And I wanted to take bits and pieces of this interview and kind of share it with you, because I assist churches with getting their technology straight and actually providing the live stream services to our church congregants. But I felt like every bit of this discussion was important. And so I want you all to listen and pay attention to this discussion amongst these top pastors, because I really believe that they will really help determine how we go forward with online churches and e-churches and how we can communicate with our audiences. So if you're a pastor, definitely tag fellow pastors, share this with fellow pastors and ministry workers. If you're a technician like myself and you're actually running the digital side of it, this is important for you as well. So make sure you share this with your community and the other ones that are supporting you providing these services, because this affects all of us. And during this panel discussion, I want you to do two things. Number one, make sure you get subscribed to the channel if you want to learn more about digital and technology for your church. But number two, and more importantly, let me know in the comment section, what are your takeaways? What are things that you're doing right now? And what are some things that you're going to look to implement here going in the future? And so without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy this panel discussion from some of the top leaders in our country.
Hi, I'm Bishop Joseph Walker III, pastor of the Mount Zion Church of Nashville, Tennessee. A few weeks ago, I shared with you my heart concerning the coronavirus and its impact upon our culture as well as our community. I shared that on the Ricky Smiley platform on his Facebook page, and many of you reached out to me and told me that you shared the same sentiments, as well as you wanted to be involved in solutions. I was so encouraged by that, and as a consequence, we've developed a series of conversations called Pastoring Through a Pandemic. And we want to have high-level conversations that provide strategies, solutions to help our community and our church leaders navigate through this unprecedented time. It is a fact that COVID-19 has revealed much about our communities and our churches. It has really shown us a heightened sense of individualism, as well as reactionary leadership, and the failure that both of those things have had in helping us work through and mitigate this issue, coronavirus. It has exposed the great divide of economic disparities, as well as health disparities in our community, and put a demand upon the church to reimagine who it needs to be in light of the communities by which it serves. Many churches now struggling with innovation, trying to figure out technology to be relevant and sustainable, and don't have the practical skill sets to do it. This conversation you're going to hear today is going to provide some solutions to help leaders and help churches become more innovative and give them strategies on how to engage this post-COVID culture. It is also important to understand that we need to hear the truth. around COVID and its impact upon an underserved community. We need to hear the truth, and how we can protect ourselves and protect our families is incredibly important. To that end, we've assembled a great convocation of influence, ranging from pastors, thinkers, medical doctors, to help you engage in a robust conversation that moves this needle forward to help us come through this together. And we will get through it together. Let's go in. We call this one Grace for a New Space. Well, thank you so much for joining this very timely discussion. It is important for us today to really delve into this because our communities need us to address these particular issues that are impacting not only our church, but impacting our world. Let me introduce our amazing guest today, and I'm so incredibly grateful to have. He is the pastor of the Elizabeth Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, a great man of God, Pastor Craig Oliver. Let me also introduce to you the pastor of the Lighthouse Church of Houston, Texas. We're so happy to have him, an incredible leader, reaching so many millennials, and I appreciate him being on as well, Pastor Keon Henderson. The Double Barrel Shotgun out of Houston, Texas, there he is, pastor of the Higher Dimension Church. That's the other part of who's reaching all of these millennials there and doing incredible work in the social media space as well, Pastor Terrence Johnson. Let me also introduce to you a pastor who is particularly one who has been an incredible paradigm for innovation. His church is a cutting edge ministry. He's one of those people who loves being under the radar, but his ministry continues to push him beyond the radar. And he is one of the most humble men I know. I'm thankful for him. Pastor of the First Baptist Church, Glen Arden, Pastor John Jenkins. We also thank God today for a young man who is doing extraordinary work in the virtual space. He is one who has written a book on engaging churches in this innovative space, and certainly goes around the country helping churches transition. And he works in our area, helping our virtual ministry and platform go to different heights. And of course, I appreciate him, Elder Dakari Middlebrooks. Also, I want to also introduce to many of you, Dr. Stephanie Walker, who is a neonatologist by trade. She is a Master of Public Health from Harvard. She spent most of her life really concerned about these disparities that impact our community and health. And she really has a passion for helping the church and the community come together in solving many of these health crises and these pre-existing conditions that obviously we need to address on this particular talk today. Thank you, Dr. Walker. We're so grateful to have the founder of the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship. Of course, he is truly one who is innovative enough. He's been through many different dispensations in the kingdom, and he's constantly remained relevant. And he's one that can really help us understand what it means to understand change, and one who has done it well in so many different generations and continues today to be relevant in streaming and all of that. And we thank God for the pastor of the Changing Generation Full Gospel Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, Bishop Paul Sylvester Morton. And of course, we thank God for a man who has been used as a general among us to speak to culture, and one who has addressed many of these issues every single day to the world in a way that has been impactful, and one who has spent much of his time really helping the church do ministry outside the walls and understanding the economic impact of what we do. Not only that, but so involved in the social space of helping people every single day. It's a humanitarian, a pastor, and one who is truly, truly touching lives, not only here, but all around the world. He is Bishop T.D. Jakes. Thank all of you so much for being with us today. And this is a series of conversations that has really spawned out of many conversations that have happened around this pandemic. And I want to just begin, first of all, talking about this pandemic and what we're dealing with. And I want to start actually with Dr. Walker and giving some context on this COVID-19. Clearly, this is something that has arrested the community, and particularly the Black community, in terms of how it has impacted us in disproportionate ways. And so I want to kind of lay as a foundation, what is this thing doing? What is it? And how is it impacting us in the way it is if we're not in the majority of the population?
No, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic question to start with. I think one of the first things that we just want to step out and say is that health disparities are not new, right? Health disparities have been around for, years, right? And so right now, what the COVID-19 is actually doing is really just uncovering or revealing the problems that have existed and just have been neglected for, years. And so specifically for the African American community, when it comes to health disparities, we know in general that COVID-19 attacks those that are at higher risk in terms of death rates. Okay, so we know that those who are at higher risk are dying of COVID-19 at higher rates than other populations. So what are those risk factors? Those risk factors are those things that hit our African American populations the hardest, such as hypertension, such as diabetes, such as obesity, such as connective tissue disorders like lupus and sarcoidosis, and mixed connective tissue disorders and undifferentiated connective tissue disorders. But also you're thinking about HIV, which is another virus that went haywire back in the 80s. But then you're also talking about cancers, which African Americans are dying from at greater rates than other populations. So all of these things combined make us in general at greater risk, but these are things that we deal with on a regular basis on a normal day. So then you layer COVID-19 on top of that, and I mean that's what we're dealing with, and that's what we're seeing. But that's not it, right? So you're thinking about just what we're dealing with on an everyday basis in terms of our health, but then you have to layer on poor access to healthcare on a regular basis, right? Then you have to layer on this whole idea of misinformation. Very early on, when COVID-19 was first sort of put out there in the media, you were hearing stories about sort of well-to-do Caucasians who were going out and traveling and coming back after their luxury vacations. So the word on the street was this didn't bother or impact Black people. Right. And so as a result, a lot of the people in our communities didn't take it seriously, didn't take the necessary precautions. And then on top of that, you have to deal with this idea of, the idea of social distancing. That's a luxury. Being able to go to your home, whether it be in the suburbs or wherever, and be away from people is a luxury. Right? And so you layer on poverty and economics. And so for our people who are in urban communities, our people who are in crowded, projects or homeless shelters or in prisons or jails, that's a whole nother beast on top of COVID-19, right? And so it just makes it easier for that to spread in those communities. And then you layer on top of all of that, the fact that, when they call for essential workers, everyone stay home. Staying home is a luxury. Our essential workers typically look like us. Yes, we have, our representation, of course, in doctors and nurses and frontline workers, but let's not forget our essential workers who are janitors and cooks and mailmen and bus drivers and people who don't have the luxury of staying home. And then in the very beginning, many of these individuals didn't even have the proper protective equipment. And then, of course, let's not forget our supermarket workers. And so all of these things combined is why we find ourselves in this situation. So it's not just one thing, but what it does is this whole COVID-19 really just uncovered what's been going on and what's been neglected for years and years and years.
Right. Thank you. Wow. Bishop Jakes, the church has obviously I think, in some sense, not address this health issue head on. We've obviously skirted around it, and we've kind of glorified a lot of things, in terms of how we're eating and things of that nature. And, health has kind of been on the back burner. And now we often talk about how COVID has caught our health system and our politicians off guard. It's clearly caught the church off guard. What do you think should be the church's now response and posture in dealing with this issue of health and disparities and how we address it as a body of Christ?
If we are going to, first of all, thank you for hosting this panel, inviting me to be a part of it. It is my thought that if we're going to really leave an indelible impression on our community and effectively help with health disparities, we also have to address the food deserts that exist in our communities, the propensity of certain types of food chains to target our communities with unhealthy foods that do not target other communities. I don't believe that the church by itself can do anything extremely effective. I think our strength is in our ability to partner with elected officials, CEOs, and community leaders. That four-pronged approach to lifting up a problem becomes very, very effective. Our people have been trained to think of the church of being sort of a United Nations, that it can do all things by itself. And then when we make those promises and don't live up to them, then we face great criticism. The reality is that the church is right now, when the community suffers, the church suffers. So one of the things that we can do, though, is convene these types of forums with influencers and begin to put up some safeguards in our community as it relates to eradicating food deserts. Then we can teach better eating habits, offering cuisine classes, doing online tutorials for healthier styles of cooking, because most of us cook like our mothers. We cook like our grandmothers. We cook with fatback and hog maws and seasoned stuff with pork and all that kind of stuff, because that's where we came from, which goes all back to slavery legacy and eating. We had to eat what was left, not what was right. So we have developed an appetite for eating what was left rather than what is right. And I think that we can be instrumental in that regard, and we can use our platform to disseminate information. But the strongest impact, because this means we have to influence the Krogers, the Walmarts, the grocery stores, the CVSs to come into those communities and make accessible to our people medical help and food desert eradication, and then awareness. And I think we have to use our influence to prod the city officials and the CEOs to become more responsible in being inclusive and not just targeting zones and area codes, zip codes, based on per capita media income.
Pastor John Jenkins, you spend a lot of time collaborating, and you do that quite well. And obviously, I know you serve on the board of a bank, and you understand the economic impact and disparities that exist, and particularly now. There's not only the health disparity, but the economic disparity. And what are you seeing now? Obviously, many folks are being furloughed, and many folks are, and obviously there's a lot of funding and things out there that people can have access to. And of course, it's going back and forth about how we're running out of money and getting it. And so what do you see now, the church's role in helping folks access that capital? And what have you been able to do at First Baptist Glenarden to help your community in this particular area?
Thank you, Bishop, I want to echo what Bishop Jakes has said already. I appreciate greatly you having me to be a part of this group of distinguished men and your beautiful wife. I'm honored to be on this panel. So our church has taken an aggressive stance in helping our members and the community. And I want to add some things that Bishop Jakes has talked about that we've been involved in doing. We are talking to and challenging the political leaders of our community in terms of their response to how they can help our membership and just the people in the community. The other thing that we're doing, that the church, we had not been as actively involved, but we're much more actively involved now. It's not just talking to the political leaders. We're actually putting political leaders in office. We are backing, both legally and discreetly, people who have a higher interest, not in their own political careers, but in fact making a difference in the decisions that they make for the community. So we recently played a part. One of our members is the county executive, and we're encouraging that person to put people in positions of power and authority to help the people in the community. Our church is also, we're doing what so many other churches are doing. We're feeding families. We're training entrepreneurs. We have a ministry that all they do is train entrepreneurs about how they manage their money, how they get connected in the political process of getting funding for things. We're training them and exposing to them the kind of things, which we haven't had that available to us in the past. We've been hidden and blocked out. But now we got people in position, and we are making sure that our members and the community get the appropriate information so they can make great decisions and be in a good posture.
Thank you so much. I want to take a shift here. Obviously the church itself has to reimagine this virtual space and how we interact with people. It is definitely a new terrain for many people. I want to first address this to Bishop Paul Morton, and then I want Elder Takari Middlebrooks to come and chime in right after him. Bishop Morton, you've been able to transition different eras. It's been relevant during the time, of course, obviously, when you were one of the first to be on television, on national television. And here you are being incredibly relevant in terms of transitioning into the virtual space. Many of your cohorts, however, and some have had difficulty transitioning. Can you talk about why it was easy for you to transition, and what are you saying to other pastors in your cohort, your generation, to help them remain relevant in Bible in this generation?
Thank you so much, Presiding Bishop. And I appreciate you, and thank you for including me in this number today. This is very, very important, I believe, for the world. I thank God because in the 80s, that's when I realized how important it was even to go on national television where I could reach the world. Because so many times we get stuck within the four walls and we think that's it. Got a packed house. Oh, the house is packed. But how many souls are we missing? And that becomes important. Now, the problem that we face, and that's why I think it's so very, very important to talk about the virtual church, because it's important in this day and time, because this is the way that we have to go. At least there has to be a balance. I believe people will, of course, come back to the house of God, but then we cannot be anti-virtual church. Listen, I know it's so difficult for people to change, and that's the problem. I've just been an agent of change. I'm about to turn 70 years old, but I still believe in change, because the future belongs to those who are open to positive change. And so even in our name, changing a generation becomes important. We're called changing a generation because change never stops. You've got to keep changing. You've got to keep developing if you're going to fulfill your purpose. The problem that a lot of people face, and that's why if we're going to meet the needs of people, I'm telling you, it's very, very important that the sheep hear from their shepherd when they're going through like this coronavirus. They need to hear the voice of their shepherd. We cannot go to the house of God at this particular time, but we ought to thank God for the virtual church, because we're able to still reach people. And even maybe you just have a few members, but you ought to at least do a online call, phone call with your members. They need to hear your voice, because you have a lot of people out there who steal sheep, shepherds who steal sheep. So we have to be careful as it relates to what we're doing in this season for the virtual church. So listen, I would recommend even to pastors who've never developed to this level of the virtual church, always remember, and this is important, marry the mission, but date the method. Marry the mission, but date the method. Too many people, you want to marry the method. You're not supposed to marry the method. I've changed a lot of methods because as times change, then I have to change. When I got married, my mission was to marry Deborah Brown. That was the mission. Now, she was trying to play hard to get. And so while she was playing hard to get, I had to practice my method. So I would take other young ladies to the movies. I would take them to the restaurant, but I didn't want them to get the idea. Listen now, I'm just dating. Ain't nothing serious here, because I had a mission. And that's the way that we have to feel about what we are doing for God. The foundation has to be strong. winning the lost, preaching the gospel. That's the mission. But methods change. So while we cannot even be in the building right now, the house of God, the building, we've got to use different methods. And so that's why the virtual church is important if we're going to survive. I believe that we've got this opportunity now to really learn, those who have not been involved in the virtual church. Even going back to the house of God, at least if you set up the virtual church so that you'll be able to minister to more people outside of the walls of the house of God. That's where the blessing comes in. So I believe in the virtual church.
Wow. Thank you so much, Bishop Morton. And, you know, I've always believed that success is about surrounding yourself with people who are bright and innovative. And one of the things I've done is surround myself with a lot of young people in Nashville. We've been able to have so many students who come through, and one young man on this panel now, he left Morehouse and came to Vanderbilt Divinity School. I remember very specifically him being a millennial, but sitting down with me in a Starbucks, and we began envisioning this virtual space. And I turned it over to him. It put us 7 years ahead in terms of actually developing a virtual space. And Dakari, I want you to speak to the things you've learned. You know, being a millennial, you guys have owned this space when you were a millennial. Now I know millennials now no longer millennials. You're much older, but in terms of how you have seen many churches struggle, Bishop Morton is certainly an example of what transition looks like in innovation. You know, I often said you can't have an 8-track ministry in a downloadable generation. It just doesn't work. Here you are now, you know, helping churches move into this space of virtual ministry and innovation. And can you talk about some of the struggles you've had and some of the things and some of the hopes you have in terms of helping these churches move into this space? Because it's really not the future, it's right now.
Yes, thank you, Bishop, one, for the opportunity to be a part of this amazing group of leaders. I've studied all of you all, and I'm grateful to be here to not only engage, but also to learn and continue to get more wisdom from this call. I think that to address this properly, I think we have to deal with this idea that has been employed by our churches, which is fake it until you make it. I believe what this pandemic has done, Dr. Oliver, is that it has caused, versus it, what it's done, it hasn't caused a problem as much as it has revealed one, which is faking it until you make it only works when no one's watching. But now everybody's watching. And I think it's done two things. Bishop Jakes, I think it's one, it has exposed our vulnerabilities, shining a light on our truth. And Bishop Morton, I think, also has crippled our infrastructure, showing us who and what is essential. Many leaders and pastors created ministries based on the presence of people always being available and present. That made sense, Dr. Steph, last century. What social media, when it hit the scene in the early 2000s, we should have started planning then. When Netflix and Blockbuster dismantled, when Netflix and Redbox dismantled Blockbuster, we should have created infrastructures then. You know, many of our leaders are resistant now to this new movement because the things in which they created, they don't know how to operate outside of what they created. And I think that's the challenge. Many of our leaders and pastors cannot grow beyond the levels in which they've created. So if you created systems that's based on people being present and actively engaged, which is your ministerial programs, your Wednesday services, your Sunday services, and we never shifted to doing online classes and giving back people their hottest commodity, which is time, then now you're going to be at a disadvantage, because what this generation and the generation after me is seeking more than anything, and what they value more is their time. Can I have my time? And what this digital space and virtual space has done is showing you what they value most. And I think in order for us to shift, we have to figure out, as leaders and pastors, how do we give people back their times, but offer them something that is effective for this next age?
Pastor Keon Henderson and Pastor Terrence Johnson, in that order, I'll raise this one question to both of you. Obviously, the demographic of your congregations, young adult, millennials, and obviously there has been a reliance upon technology, social media, and now you have a generation who now is sitting at home and trying to get out, because now the community definitely matters, right? Now they're pretty much tired of just texting and doing that, but they really want to get out. So now the question becomes, how have you been able, obviously in this post-COVID reality, to minister to that demographic, and what are some of the things that concern you, and what are some of the hopes you have post this particular pandemic?
Again, as echoed by everybody prior to me, what an honor. I mean, I'm looking at all of the pictures of you guys, and there is a person at some point in time that I didn't idolize or honor. So God, thank you for the invitation. What I've discovered in discussing these conversations with people in our sphere of influence is, while there is a group of people who are concerned about their health, remember when this thing hit the scene, it was older Caucasian man's disease, the northern part of the country. Black people couldn't get it, and we were thanking God for the pigmentation, and all of that now seems to be null and void. But by and large, people our age are still not afraid. We're still trying to figure out ways to get together, and you'll see more responsible people. For instance, states that are opening up now, if you go through the social media feeds, everybody was excited about finally being able to go get their nails done or get their hair done or go to the barbershop. And so the institutionalized fear hasn't been embedded in our generation. But what is, what we're thinking is, how can we come out of this economically astute as opposed to fearing the disease? So the gold rush of the 1850s, for instance, what I'm hearing is, how do we make money off of this disease? Because when the gold rush came, you know, a lot of people went out and got the gold, but the percentage of people who got gold was very small. So if you look at it historically, the people who made the money was not necessarily the people who found the gold, but the people who sold the shovels and the buckets. The same thing with the advent of the legalization of marijuana. The people who are making the money is not the people who are necessarily selling the item. It's the people who are making the lamps and the people who know how to build the building, so you can do it over time. So the conversation, how I've kept them engaged through this, since they're not going to be afraid of the disease, I've shifted the conversation to an economic status, an economic zone. And, you know, what stocks can you invest in that will help to curate this antibody or needles, because it maybe have to be administered that way, or who's making the swabs and the Q-tips. And so we've taken the conversation and we've shifted it into a thing that matters for them. And as the car said, they're trying to figure out how to make money and how to save the time. And then using a little more wisdom in there and telling them, you still got to be safe, because if you're dead or sick, you can't spend the money, or you can't, you know, assuage or access the capital. So it's a hybrid of a conversation, seems to be keeping them engaged. And so it's using economics and wisdom as an approach.
Pastor Terrence. While he's getting together, I think that's incredibly insightful to think through that, you know, and to process that, because I do think one of the things, and Dr. Steph, if you could chime in while Pastor Terrence is getting ready, because one of the things that you brought up is that this generation is not afraid of this particular disease. And that is obviously somewhat concerning, the fact that they aren't afraid. And I think that's something we should talk about, because that's one of the things that I remember very clearly, my wife having this moment where they just don't understand. And Dr. Steph, if you could speak to that, how this particular disease impacts this generation, and they're not immune from it.
You hit it right on the head. And I think that's another reason why our numbers are going up as well, in terms of misinformation. And it's not their fault, right? Because that's what the news said. The news said, the risk factors were being elderly and being sick and having disease risk factors, right? And so if you're healthy and you're running around and you're saying, I feel great, then why should you be afraid until you actually read the numbers? And the statistics are showing that at least 20 to 30% of the people who are in the ICUs are people that are between the ages of 20 and 40. That's not elderly. And most of these people don't even have underlying risk factors. And so it was just being able to be well informed, being able to follow the news cycles, being able for us as leaders to put that information out there as quickly as we were learning it. Sometimes we were doing it and sometimes we weren't. But really it's a misnomer. And then the idea too is sometimes you have to do things not for yourself, but for the greater good, right? Because I might be healthy, but I have parents, I have aunts, uncle, cousins, nieces, nephews, someone like 80 to 90% of our African-American population is impacted by something, whether it be asthma, diabetes, hypertension, something. Everybody's got something, right? And so just being mindful as even if you can't do it for yourself, do it for the people that you love. Like for example, Bishop and I have elderly parents, and those elderly parents are surrounded by young people. And so the first calls that we made were to our parents, but then we sat and had to have conversations with the young millennials who we knew were coming in and out of the house. Because at this point, it's not about you. It's about what you're going to bring home, and you're going to feel great. You're not even going to know that you have contracted the disease, but you're going to be a quiet carrier and you're going to pass it on. Because the reality is, in terms of these numbers, we're almost at 1 million people in the United States who have contracted coronavirus. In a few days, if not the next week or so, we will have more people who have died of the coronavirus than who died in Vietnam. 58,000 people died in Vietnam. And in the next few days, we will surpass that. Vietnam was what, 10 years? This has been around for 4 to 5 weeks. And it's not the people that are transmitting the disease are not necessarily the ones who look and feel sick. Because if someone sneezes or coughs, what are you going to do? You're going to run. You're going to walk the other way. You're going to cover your face. You're going to wear your mask. You're going to do whatever. It's the people who look well, feel good, and don't even know that they're carrying the virus. Those are the people that we have to worry about. And many of them are young, healthy individuals.
You know, one of the things that I want to address, I think it's important, and I want to bring in Dr. Oliver because I know he's truly a homiletician, he's a practitioner when it comes to that and his theology and working sermons and helping other pastors in that area. And one of the things that is critical now is us to really look at the presentation of the pulpit going forward. Many, as you know, many of our churches built their ministries on the revivalist model and did not focus on infrastructure. John Jenkins did not focus on systems and things of that nature. Now, Dr. Oliver, what do you see now? How do you minister to people in this virtual space? Can you give some practical examples and things that you want to share with folks in terms of what this looks like going forward? Because obviously, you can't look at somebody and say, turn to your neighbor. You don't have the privilege of drawing off of that. So there has to be a different way in which we present the gospel in this virtual space. Dr. Oliver.
Absolutely, and as echoed by everyone else, thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this amazing panel. And as indicated, certainly the whole process of preaching has shifted. It's intimidating to even respond to this particular question in light of a lot of the preachers that are on this conversation. I idle as preachers. And so what I'm going to share is not dealing so much with the homiletic aspect of it, the whole exegetical and word study and context and culture and all of that type of stuff. We get that part of sermon development. But how do we move from preaching to make an impression, to make an impact? Because again, we're preaching in an empty church. And so just utilizing the word impact as a template that can perhaps give some thoughts of how we can still make an impact So I stands for the whole aspect of being individual as it relates to the target. Middlebrooks has just modeled that for us in this whole conversation. If you notice when he started calling out names and he made the whole point that he was making, though speaking to everyone, he was still individual as it relates to the target. And so we're no longer in a church building, brick and mortar, but rather we're speaking at a small dot in a camera. And yet at the same time, it has to come across, be transmitted as if I'm speaking to an individual. No different than when we have preached within the confines of the church and a person would approach us and would say something to the effect, it sounded as if he was preaching that sermon directly to me. And we have to be more intentional in being individual in target, motivational in focus. When I say motivational, there's at least two aspects that we have to be focused on at a motivational perspective. Number one, cognitive. In preaching, I want to challenge the way you think. I want to make sure that I'm preaching in such a way, if I'm going to make an impact, that I'm touching you at a cognitive level. I'm causing you to think. I'm trying to turn the gears of your mind, but not just cognitively, but emotive and even affective. Not just how you think, but also how you feel. It goes without saying that the emotions are everywhere right now. And so we want to make sure that we're, of course, dealing with both of those aspects. The heart and the head has to take place in that whole preaching process. P, it has to be pastoral in heart. Founder Bishop Morton just made mention about my sheep hear my voice. And if there's ever a time, even in this unique space that we're in, that we have to be pastoral in our preaching, now is that time. Every pastor has not been exalted to a place of having the pulpit that speaks to the entire country or generation, as is the case of a Bishop Jakes, as is the case of a Bishop Morton, as is the case of a Bishop John Jenkins. Not a lot of people have been crowned with that type of grace. And so even when I preach online, though it's Facebook and though it may be YouTube, I'm still preaching as if I'm talking to the members of ABC. And everyone else in the world, you can eavesdrop on the conversation, but I'm pastoral still in heart. I still have an obligation to the souls that God has placed under my pastoral leadership. I think it has to be, again, apologetical at its core. Apologetic preaching, of course, deals with the defending of the faith. And the faith is not so much being under attack by heresy. There are people who go to church now that is wrestling with their faith. Where is God in this? How could God allow this to happen? And so I think, again, even in the preaching, we miss the mark when we're preaching all around the world, but not dealing with biblical truths and biblical doctrines, such as Psalms 91. Let's deal with God is still here and we still can find protection under his wing. And then, of course, we deal with the whole aspect of C, conversational in tone, that even as I'm preaching, I want to have a conversation, and this is again, just my personal view on preaching. And this is not to throw any shade to anyone else as it relates to their preaching process. But I'm not trying to conduct a revival online. That's just me. Everyone knows I'm in the sanctuary by myself. And so there's no need of my having an organ to back me up and I'm shutting it down and going 5 gears. It looks a little odd, And so I'm having a conversation. If I can talk about Bishop Jakes, even with this talk show, when he would sit there with the person sitting right across from him, he would have a conversation with them. And then when the cameras would span from him to the actual audience, it's a conversation with them. And then when the camera comes directly to him and he's now talking to the people throughout the world, it felt as if he was talking directly to me. He was having a conversation. It would have been odd to come right in my face just yelling, And again, that's just my view. It has to be conversational in tone. And there will come a Sunday that the congregation will gather again in the brick and mortar and shut it down, But, in this space, just for me, it's conversational right now. So I move from the pulpit to a table, because the people I'm preaching to, it's no need of me putting on a suit and a tie and a collar and all of that type of stuff. And I know they're in bed. They're still in their, bed attire. And I'm dressed up. I'm booted and suited up, and they're still in a comfortable leisure type of attire. And I'm done. it has to be transformational in purpose. That at the end of the day, there's no need of taking a Bible, no need of calling yourself preaching if you're not preaching towards the end of transformation. So how is this sermon going to bring you from a place of worry to worship, from anxiety to a place of assurance, from this place of panic to a place of praise? How do we transition you in this moment? And so again, I really believe that preaching in this unique space, we have to preach with the purpose of having an impact and not solely just to impress. So hopefully that provides some
Oh my
insight.
goodness. Thank you so much. Wow, Dr. Oliver, that was so rich and just full of practical application. And Terrence Johnson, if you want to come back and kind of chime in.
Yeah.
Hear from you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Bishop.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for having this time, and to everyone. So good to see y'all. And Bishop, I'm going to ride the millennial, thing. I'm not a millennial anymore.
Oh, I know that.
I'll be 50 in 2 years, right? So I done got out of that group. But I think just what Bishop said, Bishop Morton. I think the whole thing, this is a moment, and it is a moment for the pastors that have to be managed, for those who may be further along. And I think God create moments like this, and it's a passing moment when it comes to the technology. But I think people are kind of ripe now to kind of hear what Bishop was saying. I think what we need to do is have an audience with pastors to talk about the mission remains, even though the methods change. And that's pretty much what I've been focusing the church on. Like the mission, we're still on mission. And our mission ultimately is to bring people in and to build them up and to teach them how to be followers of Christ. That is the mission. So when you go to Mark chapter 2, and they were bringing this guy to the house to meet Jesus, the traditional way to get to Jesus was blocked. Well, that's what happened when COVID hit. All of our traditions and methods to get people to Jesus was blocked. They go up on the roof, they cut a hole in the roof. That's creativity. That's innovation. That if we can teach people, the intent of innovating is to just get people to Jesus. However we do that, we still marry the mission, but our methods need to change on how we get people to Jesus. And so by default, the crises have accelerated that. That's what has happened. So now we need to teach people, hey, by default, our methods have changed. We still giving money, just giving it by technology. We still preaching, we just doing it by way of technology. But now, while people are open and listening, we need to sit down and talk about, now let's design a system and infrastructure. So when we go back, we don't go back to the past. We're going back to a new normal. And the new normal is face-to-face, we're going to have structure and system. And virtually, we're going to have structure and system. And we remain ambidextrous where I'm ministering to the people face-to-face, but I don't lose the momentum that God has created from this virtual standpoint. And so I think it's that. I think like we got to emphasize, no, we still on mission. Hopefully, let's get people to Jesus. And whatever things we have to do in terms of creativity, let's do that. I think what happens a lot of times, we just create to create. We got to create with the intent to fulfill the mission. And if our creativity is not moving people toward the mission of the church, I think that's not good innovation. So I think the body is right now, and we just got to make sure we manage this moment.
Thank you. Bishop Jakes, I want to throw this out to you first, and we'll just have an open discussion for whoever wants to chime in, because I think the question is broad for a variety of different perspectives. We clearly are not going back to normal. There's going to be a new normal, as Pastor Terrence Johnson has said, and all of us probably agree with. And one of the things that I'm clear about is we have to reassess what is essential. What this has taught us in terms of church is really to reassess what is essential and what is not. We're doing the same thing with less. So as we go back, what do you think now? What strategies would you employ to help us work through this idea of essentialism? What will be essential going forward and what will not? Obviously, many of our churches and much of the stuff we do is filled with a lot of fluff, a lot of stuff, and our folks are now really being blessed. Our services are now 50 minutes, an hour. They're like wonderful. You know, we're reaching more people now. So we go back to the physical space. People are going to be looking for a lot of that fluff. They want to get right back to what they're used to over this COVID experience. So if you could speak to that, and we'll just throw that out, whoever wants to chime in.
You know, thank you for the opportunity. I've been giving that a lot of thought, and I've not reached a completed thought, so this is an incomplete thought, but I will nevertheless share it in its original embryonic form. I think that our idea of what our mission is has to be broadened. I think that while our mission from a biblical perspective is to bring people to Jesus Christ, those metrics are not quantifiable in a contemporary society. And if we're going to sit at the table with influencers that bring about change in community, and they're trying to quantify how many people graduated from high school or got into STEM programs, or how many people were fed or clothed, and we're talking about how many people we baptized, I'm not sure that it's going to give us a seat at the table of influence to make the difference. So I'm not at all suggesting that we forsake the original Great Commission to go into all the world and preach the gospel, not at all. But this is what I've been thinking. Jesus was preaching when the disciples told him that they were hungry. He didn't just keep preaching. He stopped and met their natural needs simultaneously with meeting their spiritual needs. And I think that the churches that survive and going forward in the 21st century, post-COVID-19, will be multidimensional. They will be resource centers that serve functions other than just preaching the gospel. I think we have to address what else do they need. And from a theological perspective, it is my understanding that we are commanded, if a brother is cold, we don't give him a blessing, we give him a coat. If he's hungry, we don't just say, I'm praying for you, we give him something to eat. I think our communities in particular, because they have been forsaken and abused by so many other institutions, expect more from us than just discipleship. And I think that if we're going to be successful in the 21st century, we have to have programming like what John Jenkins was talking about that educates our entrepreneurs how to be effective in this world while we wait on the world to come. We have to include health tips like your wife began to share, because we are a trusted voice. We have the onus and the responsibility is on us to begin to introduce health tips and to separate, especially now with the propaganda that is perpetuated through social media. I had about 100 friends to send me a message that all I needed to do to be rid of COVID-19 was drink hot water every 20 minutes, and it was going to go away. Those types of things, our people don't know what's real and what's not real, but they believe you. And so for you to be a gatekeeper of truth is very important, lest they plug up their veins to a bottle of Lysol. We have to be progressive enough to say, no, that's not true. Yes, this is true. And because we have a responsibility to our congregation, but more broadly, we have a responsibility to our generation and to our world. And Jesus fed with one hand and preached with the other. And I think this duplexity or this multiplicitous way of leadership is going to be paramount in a society where the commodity that cannot be produced, manufactured, or distributed is trust. And to the degree that we have the trust of certain segments of our community, that trust comes with the responsibility that our vision is not myopic and it is not lasered into one style of leadership. We have to meet the people where they are, meet their needs. Jesus, who walked the water, Peter finds on the bank cooking fish. And I think the challenge for the leadership going forward is not just, can you preach? It might be, can you walk on water? And sometimes it might be, can you fish? or can you put somebody up front who can teach me how to fish or how to cook fish? And I'm using that metaphorically to say, before COVID-19 came up, the projections were over the next 20 years that the unemployment rate was going to go from about 7% at the time to about 20% because we were not being educated in fields that were marketable. I don't even know how that 20% has escalated post COVID-19. So if we end up with 40 or 50% of our people unemployed, not only is that going to increase crime and decadence and pregnancies and destructive behavior and emotional breakdown and spousal domestic abuse and divorces and so forth and so on, it is also going to cause the erosion of the functionality of the institution, the physical institution of the church. And I think the only solution is to be multiplicitous in our vision. We have been we fed about 5,000 first responders, 5,000 meals to first responders who work night shifts, where the hospitals, restaurants are shut down, and all the restaurants in the city were shut down. Nurses, janitors, police officers, we fed 5,000 people. All of a sudden, people begin to recognize that, and it brought us to other tables to have other conversations. Had I passed out tracts to 5,000 people, it would not have had that level of impact. So my challenge to the leaders that are listening to this today is to get out of the box of being one-dimensional and have a mission that is multiplicitous, because sometimes you have to preach like Jesus and also bring order into the community, setting them in groups of 50 and feeding them, taking care of their natural needs to remain credible in the position that we're placed in. We must have metrics in order to go forward. And I've been long, let me say one little thing on the social media piece. It's not enough that you have social media or that you're streaming online if you're not watching your metrics, if you're not geo-targeting your message, if you're not really doing the analytics on the message. A lot of us as leaders, we want to preach and we don't want to be bothered with the other parts of it. But social media and cyberspace is a science, and you have to be intentional about it and respect it. Anything you don't respect won't respect you, and you won't maximize it, and you'll throw your hands up and say, it's not working for me. It won't work for you. It will work if you work it, but you have to put the work into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Jakes, for that.
Bishop Walker, to add to that, I think it's important because Bishop is exactly right. So we create these methods. One of the things that I said to our team, don't bring me any innovation or don't bring me any idea that you don't believe will be a sustainable model post-COVID-19. I don't want to be on the internet doing 6 and 7 shows and filming this and filming that and being creative. And then the building opens up and then we go right back to the same thing. So I said, whatever we can't sustain, let's not do. Revelations 3:16, we all know that story about you got the hot waters of Hierapolis and the cold waters of Colossia. And the Bible talks about how God hates the lukewarmness. And so the idea then is that the hot waters from Hierapolis, the people of Rome are trying to pipe that water in to themselves. And by the time the water gets from Hierapolis all the way to Rome, it's lukewarm. And so I think that what we have to do is we have to make sure we don't do what they did, is create a 6-mile pipeline where the change loses the steam once we reach this place of being able to come back. So now we've got all of this stuff. We're firing off all of these innovative ideas. We're doing Zoom panel discussions and we're fighting for it. And DJs are getting online and having 150,000 participants, and Babyface and Teddy Riley can get 500,000 people to come together, and we watch them battle old music. And here we are thinking, oh, we got to create a new sermon every Sunday. Is it possible that the hits still work? And can we give them a rerun? And can that stuff still, does it still have steam? So what I'm afraid that we'll do is we'll pipe in these solutions, but once the buildings open, will we lose our steam? Because I think that this is something that we need to get used to, because 25 years ago, planes hit the Twin Towers And the United States government has not lost steam on making sure that we still, to this day, have to get x-rayed. We still, to this day, still have to put our liquids in the bag and sit them off to the side. And there hasn't been an incident in a quarter of a century. And yet the change is still in effect. So I think that whatever changes we make, I think they probably need to become a part of the norm. And I've said to our team, do I ever need to go back to doing the midweek service myself where I got 5,000 people watching them now and I'm still on budget and I'm at home? Do I ever need to open the church back on Tuesday? I don't know. I'm gonna try it this way, even when the building does open just a few weeks to see how it goes. So
I'm with you, buddy. I won't go back.
Yeah.
Could I just add, because I think it's very, very important. I don't want, though, God's church to become irrelevant. It's very, 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 very important. And I believe that it's all in balance, the things that we do. I was in Rochester, New York, preaching several months ago, and the driver that picked me up from the airport to take me to the hotel, we passed by a lot of vacant buildings. And he said that that's where Kodak used to be. But all of those buildings were closed down. And the reason that he gave, Kodak could not adjust to the digital age. All of those buildings there empty, but they could not adjust to the digital age. We cannot allow the church to become irrelevant. We got to make sure that we bring a balance. The Bible says, what do ye more than others? I know what others are doing. What does the church do more than others that others cannot do? And that's win souls to Christ. That's preaching the gospel. That's proclaiming the good news of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. What do you more than others? So what we have to do, we have to make sure that we are making people whole. Yes, I believe in going to the next level, because when I look at tradition, tradition is nothing but frozen success. We can get stuck in frozen success, looking back on what you did in the past, and you think it has to always be the same. It does not always have to be the same. But we've got to make sure, I still pray, when we talk about the new norm, that we do not become so selfish that we forget the job of the church is still not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. You got to minister to somebody else. It's not just about you. We cannot become selfish people and say, hey, just let me stay home. No, I still have to. There's somebody that will be sitting by me when we get back to church, somebody who's sitting by me that's about to commit suicide. I need to minister to them. I believe that even with the virtual church, the main goal of the virtual church is for the sick. It's for those who are working. It's for those who are watching from out of town. But we still have to have that brick and mortar where we can come together so that people can know what the church is all about. And that's where we got to let them know. We feed the hungry. We clothe the naked. We're doing what the world is doing. We're doing what motivational speakers are doing. But what do you more than others? And that's still, we got to keep it before our people, or the church will become irrelevant. The preacher will become irrelevant if we don't realize that our ultimate goal is still to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, to win the lost. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Just wanted to add that to it because it's all important, and some of us will take one half of it and others will take the other half of it, but we got to take all of it if it's really going to work.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bishop Morton, and thank you so much, Bishop Jakes and Pastor Keon. Let me just, as we wrap this up, and certainly I want to thank all of you for your time, please allow me just to give you a final word. And I want to give you an opportunity to just take 60 seconds and give a final thought on something you want to leave with our viewing audience. Folks around the world are hurting, and let me set this up this way. Many of us on this call, we lead congregations and institutions and et cetera, and often people lose sight of the fact that we are human beings, and we are dealing with this as well. We're in this with our people, and many of us have experienced incredible loss. Bishop Morton, we continue to pray for you, the passing of your elder brother, and of course, Bishop Jakes, you've had personal loss. I've had loss. My pastor, Dr. Harry Blake, and everyone on here has had some loss in our congregation. And it's been really a different space for all of us, and I think that it's important as we minister through this. Remember, this is really about a grace for a new space. Right? And I want you just to take about 60 seconds. And of course, I'll start with you, Pastor Oliver, and we'll just take it as from there. Everyone just take about 60 seconds and give a final word. Then I'll wrap this up at the end. But just in terms of this grace in this new space and how you're managing this, and what would you say to people as they try to navigate through this unprecedented terrain?
Thank you again so much, Bishop Walker. And just a couple of quick thoughts. One is this experience has forced us to recognize and cherish the greatest commodity that God has given unto us, which is time. And so it is so easy to say it now, once we're, sheltered in place. But the question really becomes, how do we cherish time beyond this? Do we still invest the same amount of time with our kids and our spouses? And do we invest the same amount of time that we do in prayer? Perhaps, every pastor around the country, prayer life has gone to a whole nother level, with this experience now, but will our level of prayer be at that same level? So I think, again, the greatest response we can have is cherishing the time, redeeming the time, making good usage of our time, because what we do with our time now and how we invest it now is going to determine the return that comes on the other end.
Dr. Jenkins.
One of the things I heard Bishop Jakes tell me one day was he could reach more people on the movie screen than he can in a church building. And he's not only said that, he's proven it to be true. He has reached so many people using movies and technology. And I think the thing that the church has failed to do is to use other technologies and methods, as Bishop Morton has said, to reach a community that's never going to set its foot in a church building. And as well as of a preachers that or how good as we think we are and how good as our music ministries might be, some people are never going to enter the church building for whatever reason. We got to go get them. We got to reach out to them. Yeah, we're going to still do our church thing, but we got to reach outside those walls. I'm learning the importance of not only preaching, but using stories, telling testimonies to help communicate the gospel to people that God loves them and God cares about them and Jesus died for them. And I would say to these people listening, to all of your church leaders and members throughout the breadth of who you're reaching, is we have to be creative. Creativity is the deal. We can't keep doing church the way we do it. Bishop Morton said methods change. Bishop Jakes has taught me over these years, you gotta be creative. On Easter Sunday, instead of doing something I had planned to do, my young people, here's something else I did. I got my young people involved, and they came up with a creative idea that has been huge. So I would just say we gotta be creative. We gotta work outside of the boundaries. Our church, let me try to shorten this up. Our church is still doing everything that we were doing before. The only thing we don't do is we don't have church service right now, but we're still having our discipleship groups. We're still having our ministry meetings. We're still having our discipleship classes, and we're still doing everything else that we were doing. The only thing we're not doing is having the gathering on Sundays and Tuesday nights, but we're still doing the work of the church.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Pastor. Pastor Terrence Johnson.
Yeah, Bishop, I think, if I can share with, everyone who's watching, I think lead today, prepare for tomorrow. I think this is a moment in making certain, kind of what Craig was saying, like stewarding the moment and the power of the pause. God have shut everything down because It's something about climbing and camping, a hiker, and I think really being a steward of this moment where you're leading yourself. I think a lot of times we lead the congregation and neglect self-care. So I think exercising, I think really spending time with your family. I think I pray, get closer to God and hear from him and walk away. I think Jesus was great at leaving the crowds. And I think we need to get away where we can get revelation, because often wisdom came through wilderness and revelation, you know. And so I think those things are very important. And I think also create a cadence where you can make certain you're looking forward to the future, and that this moment never hit you again, because the next time I'm going to have infrastructure, I'm going to have systems, I'm going to have plan. So that would be my thing. Just lead today. We got to get ready for Sunday, but you got to be ready for tomorrow as well, and make certain that you're managing both.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pastor. Pastor Keon.
I often use an acronym. It's called PACK. And any time a shift happens in my life, I pack. And the P is preparation. I think that you have to, as Pastor Terrence Johnson just said, you have to prepare. I think the second thing is when things around you begin to slow down, I think that's when you have to accelerate. I heard one great mentor say that whenever you look at what 97% of the population is doing, sometimes you have to do the opposite. That's what separates the top 1% or top 3% away from the bottom 97. And I watch National Geographic a lot, and there's always this little depiction of a lizard running across the water. And if you watch it in slow motion, even his feet are moving fast in slow motion, because he recognizes that in order to overcome this thing he's facing, he has to accelerate, because when you are on an unstable thing, being still makes you too heavy. So I think that in this thing of instability, we have to accelerate, and we have to do what we're doing quickly. Then calculate, because I think that there's going to be tremendous costs, right? There are going to be tremendous costs. If people do come back to our buildings, are we now going to have to hand out masks at the front doors every time we open? And is that the new budget item? Instead of envelopes, are we going to be handing out masks? And so I think we're going to have to calculate the cost of being able to do business in the future. And conversations like this help us do that. And then lastly, increase in knowledge. Dr. Stephanie said it. She's so right. The misinformation that we as a group, a people group have received, hearing her was a revelation to me. Bishop Jakes has said this 1,000 times, to make sure that when we have our own personal calls as a group, that we stay safe, because you can carry it. And so we have to increase in knowledge, and we do that by talking to people like this panel to give us wisdom. And I think this is a great thing that you've done, and hopefully we'll all carry this message out individually and leverage it.
Thank you so much, Pastor. Dakari.
Yes, again, thank you, Bishop, for this opportunity. I've learned a lot. I'm so grateful to be a part of this. I'll say this, one, being a millennial, one of the things we do a lot is we watch Netflix and Hulu and all these amazing different streaming services. Over a couple of weeks, I've been watching a lot of shows, and one movie in particular is called The Life of Pi. It's a fascinating movie that I really enjoy and I love. It's about a character, a guy who's trying to survive, and he's wrestling against this huge, large cat. This cat is trying to take his life. But there was one particular scene in this movie, and this is what my message would be. This one particular scene where he goes out and he builds some type of canoe or some type of boat, and it's floating on water. And he gets out there on the water and he's laying on it. But I thought this was fascinating. He had a journal while he was out there in the water. And Dr. Oliver, this was interesting to me. As he was sitting out there on the water, he was falling asleep because he was so tired, because he was running for his life. But he wrote in his journal, in order for me to stay alive, I have to stay awake. And that's my word for this space. If we're going to stay alive, right, in this new age, in this new space, we got to make sure we stay awake. And that's all I have, Bishop. Thank you.
Thank you for that, sir. Dr. Steph.
Thank you, Dakari Middlebrook. That was phenomenal. I loved it. So I'll just say this. COVID-19 isn't going anywhere. It's going to be here for a while. And that's our reality. That's our new reality. It will be here until there's a vaccination. And they're not even predicting that a vaccination will be anywhere in sight until early 2021. So let that sink in and get used to this. So this is just the beginning of what we're seeing as our new normal. Life will never, ever, ever, ever be the same. Church, gatherings, society will never be the same. Just like someone mentioned earlier in terms of 9/11, our airports, our transportation, it's never been the same. COVID will do the same exact thing to our society, basically change it forever. That's one. Two, as leaders, I think it's so important to make sure that we're not just taking care of our congregants and the people that we shepherd and lead, but that we take care of ourselves. You used to be able to go to your office, go to the church, go to meetings, go to conferences, go to other people's churches, and then come back home as a respite. Now you've allowed your church to move into your house. And being married to a pastor, I have seen that in our very first couple of weeks being sequestered at home take over. And we had to shut that down quickly, because otherwise you will find yourself working yourself ragged, and you will not be good to anyone, not yourself, not your congregants, not your family. Remembering that your first ministry is to your family, to your home. This is where you're supposed to come, get replenished, and then go out to fight another day, right? And then finally, as leaders, again, making sure that you're taking care of yourself mentally, physically, emotionally. I know that someone mentioned that, but also recognizing that, knowing that things will never be the same, recognize the signs when you begin to mourn the change.
Wow.
Because you guys have every church leader has spent time and energy and effort building whatever they had before COVID. All is not lost, but now you realize that you have to take the remnants of that and create something else awesome from that, using this as a jumping board, using this as a platform, right?
Wow.
Excellent.
Whew. That's grace for this new space. Thank you for sharing that. And that piece about reimagining and the grief and working and building up for years. I think about celebrating, we celebrate 28 years in one church, and now having to think about what that looks like going forward you're right. Thank you for that. So profound. Bishop Paul Morton.
I just want to let people know and thank God for this virtual space. This is very, very, very important. But always remember, personality is who people think you are. Character is who you really are. Personality is the perfume, but character is how you really smell. I'm asking in this virtual space that we do not panic. Let's not be selfish people in this hour. Jesus died that we might live. Don't confuse that scripture. I know you need money. I know you need to get back to work. I know you need to get out of the house. I understand all of that. But please understand, Jesus died that we might live. But listen, keep your distance from me, 6 feet, because I'm not going to die so you might live. So I want to make that plain. I know you can't see me, but you hear me. Thank you.
The one and only, Bishop Paul Sylvester Boyd. Bishop Jakes.
Let me make sure I'm on.
Yes, sir, you are.
I'm going to deviate. The conversations have been so amazing and so incredible that all I could do is echo the relevance that has already been perpetuated through the amazing comments that have preceded me. Instead, I would like to save my time to express something that's deeply on my heart that is related to but different from what we have talked about.
Sure.
9/11 came, the whole world watched. 3,000 people died, some of the most horrific deaths I had ever seen in my lifetime. And there were memorials, and there was mourning, and there were grieving, and there were services. And families had an opportunity to at least have some memories of recognition of their loss. We are approaching 50,000 people dead. A predominant amount of those people are Black and brown people, and nothing at all has been said or done to officially memorialize the vast majority of them. And to all of you that mourn, and all of you that grieve, and all of you that survive but suffer in silence the loss of somebody that you love, and all of your places of worship are closed down. And I explained to a Caucasian friend of mine, I said, the reason Black funerals last so long is because sometimes our funeral is the only place we get to be important. Now, you have not had that moment, but we know that your loved one is important. And when I heard the stats and recognized the volume of people, I woke up one morning, I started crying. I couldn't stop for hours. And I don't normally do that. I just lost it. A spirit of grief came over me so strong I couldn't hold it back. Don't ever let anybody tell you that we don't care and that we don't try. And my hope and my prayer is that a moment will come that we can acknowledge your mother, your sister, your wife, your child, your friend, because they do matter. And somewhere in some 18-wheeler in a black bag is somebody who gave you life. Somewhere in a refrigerated place where the morgues are full and the morticians are exasperated is your child and your friend. And as spiritual voices to America, we must stop in all of our pandering about saving the economy. I know it's important. Finding a cure, I know it's important, but we must acknowledge that 40,000 Americans are dead in bags without burial or memorial, and many more thousands grieve their loss without ever having that moment to say that what I lost mattered. And as a collection of clergy, I just wanted you to know we feel your loss, we mourn with you, we pray with you, and hopefully one day America will stop being busy long enough to acknowledge the value of what you lost. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bishop Jakes, and to all of you who have shared today. And I pray that those of you who have tuned in today have been inspired. I pray that this has been a conversation that has not only inspired you, but moved you to action and to realize that there are people who care about you and you're not by yourself. And we are challenged and we are charged to be who God has called us uniquely to be in this world. We see the need now for more attention to health disparities and taking care of ourselves and making certain that we absolutely get truth to people in light of all of the erroneous information floating out there in social media space. We are trusted partners, and we, the church, must stand up and make certain that we are addressing these issues head on. Issues of food deserts, economic disparities, and working in partnership and not in silo. We also recognize that it is important for us to really move beyond the walls of the church and be at the table of influence. In every community, particularly in the African-American community, there's a street similar to this, a street that has restaurants that will feed you unhealthy. They have liquor stores that will inebriate you, crack houses that will numb you, liquor stores, or they have pharmacies that will medicate you. Churches that are content with shouting you without empowering you. Payday loans that are exploiting you. And then there are funeral homes ready to bury you. We as the church must rise up and be the light that God has called us to be. And now we have a unique opportunity in this unprecedented moment to be who God has uniquely called us to be. Yes, concerned about the souls and the salvation of our people, but also understanding that that salvation also includes economic equity. It also includes health equity. It also includes awareness and getting our people the resources that they need, that they can have life and have it more abundantly. And it is important to know that every leader, every person gathered on this particular interview panel shares one thing with you. We all have what I believe is critical to change happening in our community and our world: empathy. What you heard in these final remarks came from a place of empathy. We feel you. We hurt because you hurt. And the truth is, we'll get through this together. The same grace that is available for us is available to you. God is our help. And thank you so much for tuning in. This is just the beginning of a series of conversations that will lead us to action. And I want to thank each one of these extraordinary pastors and leaders and thinkers and physicians, and thank all of you for giving up your time. And thank you. Continue to share this on Facebook. Please do. Let's let the world know that this conversation happened, and giving practical skills and strategies to our community as well as to our church and our leaders. Thank you again for tuning in, and may God bless you is our prayer.